Emma Carter's sneakers hit the pavement with a soft, steady rhythm, each stride slicing through the cool dawn air. This was her favorite part of the day, before the noise, before the demands, before the world expected her to be perfect. At 16, her life felt like an endless checklist: homework deadlines, college prep courses, extracurriculars her parents insisted would look good on applications. But here, during these early morning runs, she was free. Just her, the empty streets of Oak Ridge Estates, and the quiet sky beginning its slow shift from deep navy to soft lavender. The neighborhood was still asleep, its manicured lawns glistening with dew, white picket fences standing in neat rows like soldiers guarding peace. She inhaled deeply, savoring the cold air that filled her lungs, and for a moment, everything felt still, balanced, right. Then came the lights. Red and blue flared through the mist like a siren scream made visible. Emma skidded to a halt, her heart slamming against her ribs. Her mind scrambled to catch up as the harsh bark of a command cut through the silence. "Hands where I can see them." The officer's voice was sharp, mechanical, devoid of warmth. Emma's arms shot up instinctively, confusion clawing at her chest. Her breath quickened, not from exertion but from something colder, something jagged that coiled around her spine. "I'm just running," she stammered, her voice barely recognizable to her own ears. The beam of a flashlight blinded her momentarily as a uniformed officer stepped forward, his eyes scanning her like she was already guilty. "Residents have complained about trespassing." Emma's head spun. She blinked rapidly, the absurdity of the accusation slamming into her all at once. "This is a public road," she managed, trying to steady her voice, but it wavered with panic. The officer didn't flinch. Behind him, another figure emerged from the shadows, arms crossed, lips pursed in smug satisfaction. Linda Pierce, president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. Her expression was poisonous sweetness, the kind that made Emma's stomach twist. "Not anymore," Linda cooed, tilting her head as though sharing a secret joke. "The HOA has jurisdiction here. We don't tolerate loiterers or suspicious behavior." Her gaze slid over Emma's running shorts and sweatshirt with thinly veiled contempt. Emma's pulse roared in her ears. She knew exactly what this was. Her fists clenched at her sides, heat rising to her cheeks, but she forced herself to swallow it down. "I live 2 blocks away," she gritted out. "I run this route every morning." Linda's shrug was casual, dismissive, like brushing away an annoying insect. "There's always a first time." The officer's hand hovered near his belt. "Turn around." Emma's breath caught. "Are you serious?" The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before the cold steel of handcuffs bit into her wrists. And just like that, her sanctuary shattered. The holding cell was colder than Emma could have imagined. The cinder block walls, painted in a dull gray that seemed to absorb all warmth, loomed close, and the flickering fluorescent light above buzzed with an irritating, mechanical whine. It smelled of stale sweat, old coffee, and the bitter sting of disinfectant. She sat on the hard bench, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her knees drawn in as though she could somehow shrink small enough to disappear. Her mind churned, racing in frantic loops. This couldn't be real. She replayed it over and over, the flashing lights, Linda Pierce's smirk, the feel of metal cuffs on her wrists. Her throat tightened. She blinked hard, willing herself not to cry. Her fingers brushed absently against her hoodie pocket. The crumpled paper still there. That letter. The one she had laughed off just a few days ago. Certain household members engaging in behaviors that conflict with community values. At the time, it had felt like nothing more than HOA paranoia. But now, sitting on a cold bench with cuffs marks still fresh on her skin, it felt like a warning shot she hadn't taken seriously. Her stomach twisted. The metallic creak of the cell door made her flinch. A figure leaned against the frame, arms crossed with lazy arrogance, Officer Calloway. His uniform rumpled, his mustache unable to hide the amused curl of his lips. He spoke like he'd been waiting all night for this moment. "Next time, maybe don't act like you own the place, kid." His tone dripped with condescension. Emma's fingers tightened into fists. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all that came out was a soft, brittle whisper. "Can I make my call now?" He jerked his chin toward the phone mounted on the wall. "Knock yourself out." Her legs felt like lead as she stood, each step toward the phone heavier than the last. She exhaled slowly and punched in the familiar number. Each ring stretched painfully long. 3 rings. "Hello?" Her mother's voice. Sharp. Controlled. But underneath, a tension Emma could feel through the receiver. Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. Then, a shaky breath. "Dad. I was arrested." There was silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then, another voice, calm and measured, terrifyingly calm. "Her father." "Who arrested you?" Her breath hitched. "HOA called the police. They said I was trespassing." "Dad, they put me in cuffs." There was no response. Just a click. The line went dead. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. He'd hung up, not in anger, not in panic, but because he was already moving. Across town, Judge Malcolm Carter didn't waste a second. He closed the file he'd been reviewing, stood from his desk with a precision that radiated controlled fury, and grabbed his coat. His driver was waiting, the car door already open. The courthouse could wait. His daughter could not. At Oak Ridge's local police station, the quiet hum of phones and low conversation evaporated as soon as he walked through the door. The air shifted, charged with electric tension. Officers looked up, faces paling. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men who usually slouched in their chairs sat up straighter. They didn't need introductions. Judge Carter didn't need to say a word, his reputation preceded him. 6'3", broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a navy suit sharp enough to draw blood, he carried the weight of law and power effortlessly. This wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been. Officer Calloway, mid-sip of coffee, choked slightly. He tried to straighten his posture, but the sweat already prickled at the back of his neck. He cleared his throat. "Can I help you, sir?" Judge Carter's gaze was ice-cold steel. "My daughter. Where is she?" Calloway floundered. Sir, we were following HOA regulations." Carter raised one finger. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. He took a deliberate step forward. "Tell me, officer, what law, state or federal, allows an HOA to enforce criminal trespassing on public property?" Calloway's face drained of color. He darted a desperate glance toward his fellow officers. None of them moved. Carter's voice was soft, but it sliced like a scalpel. "Let me help you, officer. It doesn't exist." He adjusted his cufflinks slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "Now release her. Immediately." Calloway hesitated, his mouth dry as sand. He tried one last desperate appeal. "Judge Carter, we had a report. We didn't want to ignore a community complaint." Carter's hand slipped into his breast pocket. He pulled out his phone, tapped twice, and turned the screen toward Calloway. The image displayed, the letter. The one sent to his home, the one printed on HOA stationery, with its thinly veiled threats. "Recognize this?" His voice dropped to a whisper, more dangerous than any shout. "That's a warning, sent to my family. From Linda Pierce. Before you decided to shackle my daughter like a criminal." Calloway's breath faltered. "Now." Carter's voice was final. Calloway nodded quickly to a younger officer. "Get her out." Minutes later, the heavy metal door swung open. Emma stepped out, her back straight, but tension still radiating through her. Carter's gaze softened just a fraction. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead with a tenderness that made the room feel colder in contrast. "Go wait in the car, sweetheart." She hesitated for a heartbeat but recognized that tone, the one that meant the storm was about to begin. She nodded and turned. Judge Carter turned back to Calloway. His face hardened again, the warmth gone. "Now, officer, get me Linda Pierce. We're not done." The station was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second dragging heavier than the last. Officer Calloway sat rigid behind the front desk, sweat gathering at his temples despite the chill of the air conditioning. Across from him, Judge Malcolm Carter stood with his hands folded neatly in front of him, his posture deceptively calm but his eyes locked onto Calloway with a force that made the officer feel stripped bare. Linda Pierce arrived 5 minutes later, the rhythmic click of her heels echoing down the hallway. She appeared composed, tailored blazer crisp, pearls gleaming beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, but her eyes betrayed the smallest flicker of apprehension as she crossed the threshold and found herself face to face with the man who could end her career and ruin her name. Judge Carter didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, the silence heavy, suffocating. Linda's confidence faltered for just a moment before she straightened her spine and folded her arms across her chest. Judge Carter's voice was soft, almost conversational. "Mrs. Pierce, I assume you understand why you've been summoned here." Linda lifted her chin. "I understand that this has all been a terrible misunderstanding." She shot a glance at Calloway, silently urging him to back her up. "We were simply following community guidelines and ensuring the safety of Oak Ridge Estates." Carter's lips barely moved, but his words cut like a knife. "Safety? You mean racial profiling?" Linda blinked rapidly, the blood draining from her face. "Excuse me?" Carter slowly reached into his coat pocket and retrieved his phone once again, holding it out for her to see. On the screen was a high-resolution image of the letter, the same letter Emma had shown him, the one printed on HOA letterhead and signed with Linda's initials in the corner. "You sent this to my family." A pause, heavy and deliberate. "Mrs. Pierce, this letter constitutes harassment. A targeted threat cloaked in community language. Did you think this would go unnoticed?" Linda's jaw twitched. I was acting in the best interest of the neighborhood." Judge Carter didn't blink. "The best interest of whom, exactly?" "Because from where I stand, it seems you were enforcing your personal biases under the guise of policy." Her composure cracked, the smile faltering. "This isn't fair. I'm being persecuted for doing my job." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping into something cold and absolute. "Your job is to uphold community standards, not create them from prejudice and intimidation." And then he dropped the real bomb. "I also have records of your financial dealings, Mrs. Pierce. HOA contributions to the Oak Ridge Police Department. Donations, community grants, and special event sponsorships. All traceable. All timed perfectly with incidents of questionable enforcement." He turned his gaze to Calloway. "And you, officer, accepted gifts in exchange for selective policing. That is corruption." Calloway looked as though he might melt into his chair. It's not what it looks like, sir." Carter's stare was merciless. "It's exactly what it looks like." Linda's mask of arrogance crumbled completely. Her hands trembled at her sides. I didn't authorize anything illegal." The judge exhaled slowly, his patience razor-thin. "Mrs. Pierce, you're standing on the edge of criminal prosecution. False reporting. Abuse of power. Conspiracy. And civil rights violations that will bury you and this HOA." Linda's breath hitched, her face ghostly pale. I can explain. He raised a hand. Don't. The silence that followed was suffocating. Here's what's going to happen. You will return home, and you will prepare for the legal battle of your life. My daughter is pressing charges. I have initiated a federal inquiry into the practices of Oak Ridge Estates HOA. And I will personally oversee every inch of that investigation. His tone darkened. I suggest you find counsel. Linda staggered back a step as if his words had struck her physically. And one more thing. Carter's voice turned to steel. Any attempt to interfere with this process will be considered obstruction of justice. You have overstepped your authority for the last time. Linda's breath shuddered. Her carefully curated world was beginning to splinter, and the fear in her eyes was undeniable now. She turned without another word and fled down the hallway, the sound of her retreating footsteps swallowed by the cold, sterile walls of the station. Judge Carter straightened his tie and slowly turned back to Calloway, who sat frozen, face pale and damp. Officer, you'd best prepare a statement of your own. Because the rot in this system goes deeper than just one corrupt president. And I intend to cut it out at the root. By dawn, Oak Ridge Estates was no longer just a quiet, upscale neighborhood, it had become the epicenter of a media firestorm. News vans lined the community's iron gates, satellite dishes sprouting from their roofs like watchful eyes. Reporters in tailored suits stood in clusters, clutching microphones and speaking in urgent tones as cameras rolled, capturing every new development in real time. Across the country, headlines screamed in bold fonts: Federal Judge's Daughter Arrested by HOA-Backed Police Force, Oak Ridge Estate Scandal, Racial Profiling at the Heart of Suburbia, Justice for Emma Trends Nationwide. Social media erupted with fury. Hashtags like #JusticeForEmma and #HOAAbuse trended for hours. Videos from neighbors' doorbell cameras surfaced, showing Emma forced to her knees, the cold glint of handcuffs, and, most damningly, Linda Pierce standing just behind the officers with her arms crossed and a smirk on her face that had now become a symbol of arrogant cruelty. Screenshots of the threatening letter to the Carters made the rounds on every platform, dissected and ridiculed in endless comment threads. The community group pages that once served to remind residents about trash pickup and HOA-approved mailbox designs were now filled with vitriol, accusations, and demands for resignations. Inside the pristine walls of her home, Linda Pierce was crumbling. The phone never stopped ringing. Her inbox flooded with messages, some from desperate HOA board members, others from old friends pretending they had never supported any of this, and far too many from reporters eager for her statement. The board, once loyal to the point of sycophancy, now teetered on the edge of betrayal. Board members who had always nodded in agreement at her every decision now whispered among themselves, seeking scapegoats and plotting escape routes. The HOA released an official statement by mid-morning. It was filled with carefully crafted corporate language: regret, unfortunate misunderstanding, reviewing procedures to prevent future incidents. But the comment sections turned into battlegrounds almost instantly. You didn't regret it until the cameras showed up, one user wrote. Another added, you called the cops on a teenage girl for jogging. What's next, arresting kids for riding bikes without HOA permits? The board's next move was as predictable as it was cowardly. They pivoted, issuing a second statement blaming Linda directly. She had acted alone, they claimed. She had misrepresented policies and taken extreme actions without board approval. They painted her as a rogue element, desperate to sever ties and salvage their own reputations. But nobody bought it. Screenshots circulated showing board meeting notes that proved Linda's policies had been approved unanimously. Her signature was on every document, but their signatures sat right beside hers. With public outrage reaching a fever pitch, the board demanded that Linda make a public apology, a televised address meant to humanize her, to calm the storm. Linda agreed, but not because she intended to show contrition. Instead, she saw it as her final stage, her last chance to assert control. The press conference was scheduled for noon. Reporters crammed into the community center's meeting room, cameras flashing, microphones crowded on the podium. Linda walked onto the stage, head high, her blazer immaculate, her pearl earrings gleaming under the harsh lights. She placed both hands on the podium and looked directly into the cameras. Her voice was smooth at first. "I want to begin by addressing the unfortunate incident involving the Carter family." But then, the veneer cracked. Her tone hardened, laced with resentment. "What people fail to understand is the pressure I've been under to maintain the standards of Oak Ridge Estates." The room shifted uneasily. Reporters exchanged glances. "We built this community to be safe, secure, and orderly. And when people, regardless of who they are, disrupt that balance, it becomes my responsibility to act." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone in the back whispered, "She's doubling down." "I will not apologize for doing my duty," Linda continued, her voice rising. "This situation has been twisted by the media and opportunists who seek to undermine the values we uphold. Even Judge Carter," she paused, venom slipping into her words, "has used his position to intimidate a small, community-based organization." The reporters were no longer taking notes, they were broadcasting this meltdown live. "I have served this neighborhood for years," Linda snapped, her mask finally shattering. "And I refuse to be crucified for enforcing what all of you once agreed with." The moment went viral before she even stepped off the stage. Clips of her tirade flooded the internet within minutes. The hashtags mutated into #LindaMeltdown and #HOAMonster. Comedians roasted her on late-night shows, memes featuring her face over images of dictators circulated with captions like "When the HOA is life and death." In one afternoon, Linda didn't just lose control. She set herself on fire in front of the entire country. And everyone was watching her burn. The courtroom was packed to suffocation, the air heavy with anticipation and the buzz of whispered conversations. Every seat was filled with reporters, legal analysts, and angry residents from Oak Ridge Estates, their eyes locked on the woman who once ruled their lives with an iron fist. Linda Pierce sat at the defendant's table, her perfect posture brittle, her expression strained into a pale imitation of control. Her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve beneath the table, knuckles white, a stark contrast to the confident, smug figure who had once smirked as a teenage girl was cuffed on a public street. The trial had been swift, merciless, and broadcasted live for the world to witness. Every piece of evidence, from the threatening letter to the leaked HOA guidelines and financial records showing gifts to the police department, had been laid out like a damning blueprint of her abuses. The most powerful moment came when the doorbell footage played for the jury, freezing on Linda's smirk as Emma was forced to the pavement. The silence in the room then was so complete it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Judge Malcolm Carter sat high above the room in his black robe, his face unreadable, his authority absolute. He spoke without emotion, each word heavier than stone. "Mrs. Pierce, do you understand the charges brought against you?" Linda's voice trembled, almost inaudible. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand that your actions resulted in unlawful detainment, harassment, and racial profiling, causing both personal and community harm?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. "I do." The room seemed to tighten around her as Judge Carter lifted his gavel with slow deliberation. "In the matter of People versus Linda Pierce, guilty." The gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot, sealing her fate. Within hours, Linda was forced to resign from the HOA, not that it mattered anymore. The board she once controlled with absolute authority took less than 15 minutes to remove her, their statements filled with hollow apologies and desperate attempts to distance themselves from the mess they had helped create. But it was far too late. The residents of Oak Ridge Estates, empowered and enraged, voted overwhelmingly to dissolve the HOA entirely. Gone were the suffocating rules, the nitpicky fines, the absurd mandates on mailbox colors and grass lengths. Driveways filled with cars, porches bloomed with decorations, and homes were painted in vibrant, defiant hues, the neighborhood finally alive in a way it had never been allowed to be. And Emma? She ran. Every morning, just like before, but now her steps were light and unburdened, the weight of injustice lifted from her shoulders. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the cul-de-sac, she slowed to a stop in front of the old HOA office. The sign was gone, the building dark and empty, windows dusty with neglect. She smiled to herself, hands on her hips, breath steady and strong. With a small shake of her head, she muttered softly, just loud enough for the breeze to carry away, "Guess I own the place now." And so the empire of arrogance fell, not with a bang, but beneath the steady steps of those it had once tried to control. The question that remains for all of us: have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.